There's a difference between a woman who loves you and a woman who loves what you represent to her. I didn't understand that difference for nearly 4 years. I thought I did. I'm 63 years old. I've built houses with my hands, raised 2 kids mostly on my own after their mother left, and I've never once confused hard work with weakness. But I confused loyalty with love. That's on me. My name doesn't matter much to this story. What matters is that I'm a retired builder from Christchurch. And about 5 years ago, I met a woman named Fiona at a community fundraiser out in Rangiora. She was 51 at the time. Bright eyes, quick with a laugh. The kind of woman who makes a room feel warmer just by walking into it. We got talking over a plate of sausage rolls and didn't stop for about 3 hours. I drove home that night thinking, well, there it is. That feeling you forget exists. We were together for just under 4 years. What I'm about to tell you covers the last year of it. And the months after. Fiona worked as an executive assistant at a property development company based in Auckland. Though she lived down here in Canterbury, she commuted for work, sometimes spending whole weeks up north, which I'd accepted early on. It was just part of how we worked. I had my workshop, my garden, my routine. I wasn't the kind of man who needed constant company. I'd been alone long enough to be comfortable in my own skin. Her boss was a man I'll call by his position only the director. Mid-40s. Divorced twice. The sort of man who treats money like a personality. Fiona had worked for him for 6 years before we met. I never had a strong feeling about him one way or another. He was just part of her work life. A name she mentioned in passing. The cracks started small. They always do. About 18 months ago, Fiona started coming home from Auckland differently. Not sad, not tired, just slightly elsewhere. Like she'd left a part of herself up there and hadn't noticed. I'd ask how the week had been, and she'd give me these clipped, polished answers that told me nothing. Fine. Busy. The usual. She'd started caring more about certain things, what restaurants we went to, whether I owned anything without paint on it, whether I could talk confidently about wine at dinner parties, small digs, dressed up as suggestions. One evening in March last year, she told me the director was hosting a long weekend at his beach house up in the Coromandel. A team retreat, she called it. 4 days, some strategic planning sessions, a bit of R&R. She was going. I said, of course, go. She looked at me a little strangely then, like she'd expected more resistance. I didn't offer any. I'm not that man. I trust, until I'm given a reason not to. She left on a Thursday morning. By Saturday afternoon, she'd posted 3 photos on Facebook. I don't spend much time on social media, but my youngest daughter does, and she rang me that evening. Dad, she said carefully, have you seen Fiona's photos? I had not. I looked them up. The first was the view from the deck of a very large house over the Coromandel Harbor. Beautiful. Fair enough. The second was a group dinner shot, 8 or 9 people around a long table, candles, wine glasses, all very polished. I looked at it for a while. The director was there, seated beside Fiona. That was fine. They worked together. The third photo was not fine. It wasn't explicit. There was nothing you could point to and say, there, that's the thing. But I've lived 63 years, and I know the geometry of people who are interested in each other, the way bodies angle, the way a hand rests near but not quite on. The director had his arm along the back of Fiona's chair, and she was leaning in, not away, laughing at something with her head tilted toward him. The photo had been taken by someone else at the table and tagged without much thought. The caption said simply, "Good times." I sat with that photo for about 10 minutes. Then I went out to my workshop and I sanded a piece of Rimu I'd been meaning to get to for weeks. There's something about working with your hands when your mind is loud. The wood doesn't lie to you. You put effort in, you get result out. It's an honest transaction. I didn't ring her. I didn't send a message. I just thought. By the time she came home Tuesday evening, I'd done a lot of thinking. I'd also, quietly and without drama, updated my relationship status on Facebook. Single. I didn't announce it. I didn't send her a message about it. I simply made it accurate. She didn't notice for 2 days. When she did, it wasn't a phone call. It was a string of texts, arriving in quick succession, the way messages do when someone's been composing them in their head for a while and finally lets them loose all at once. What on earth is this? Why does your profile say you're single? Are you trying to embarrass me? People from work follow you. What are you playing at? I read them in my kitchen over a cup of tea. Then I rang her. She answered on the first ring. Her voice already at a temperature I recognized, not quite anger, more like the controlled version of it, the kind that's performing for an audience even when there's no audience present. What is going on with you? She said. I said. I saw the photos from the Coromandel. There was a pause. Not the pause of someone confused. The pause of someone recalibrating. Those are work photos, she said. We were all just having a nice time. You're being completely irrational. I'm not irrational, I said. I'm observant. There's a difference. She shifted then. Said I was insecure. Said I'd always had trouble trusting people. Probably because of what happened with my first marriage. She knew how to find the edges of old wounds, which I suppose is something you learn about a person after 4 years. I let her say what she needed to say. When she finished, I said, Fiona, I've spent 4 years being a steady presence in your life. I've been patient, and I've been faithful, and I've never once made you feel small for who you are. I've watched you slowly become embarrassed by me, and I stayed anyway because I thought it was a phase. Those photos told me it wasn't a phase. So, I updated my status. I wasn't trying to embarrass you. I was just trying to be honest about where we are. She went very quiet. Then she said, You can't make a decision like this without talking to me first. I said, You made yours without talking to me first. I'm just doing the paperwork. She hung up. I won't pretend that felt good. It didn't. 63 years old and my hands were shaking when I set the phone down on the bench. I made another cup of tea I didn't drink and stood at my kitchen window, looking out at the garden I'd spent 15 years growing. My lemon tree was doing well this year. I thought about that instead of thinking about her. She rang back that evening. The temperature had changed, completely softer now, almost careful. She said she thought we should talk in person. She said she missed me. She said the photo had looked worse than it was, and she could explain everything if I'd just give her the chance. I said I was listening. She drove down from the flat she kept in Addington the next morning. When she walked in the door, she looked the way people look when they've prepared something and aren't sure anymore if it's the right thing. She sat at my kitchen table. I made coffee because that's what you do. She told me the director had developed feelings for her. She told me it had come out of nowhere and she hadn't encouraged it. She told me she hadn't acted on anything. She told me the photo was him being inappropriate and her not knowing how to shut it down without making work difficult. I listened to all of it. Then I said, So the caption "Good Times"? That was ironic. She didn't answer. I said, Fiona, I've been a builder for 35 years. You know what I've learned? You can always tell when a structure is compromised. Sometimes it looks fine on the surface, fresh paint, good lines, but you put pressure on it and something shifts that shouldn't. I've felt that shift with us for a year. I ignored it because I wanted to be wrong. I wasn't wrong. She started to cry. Real tears, I'm not saying they weren't, but I've learned to sit with my own discomfort rather than rush to fix someone else's. I handed her a box of tissues and waited. When she'd collected herself, she said she didn't want to lose me. She said she'd let things get blurry at work, and she knew that. And she was sorry. She said the director meant nothing. She said she wanted to make it right. I thought about it for a long moment. Then I said, What does making it right look like to you? She talked about being more communicative, about setting better boundaries at work, about coming home to Christchurch more regularly. It was a good speech, thoughtful. She'd probably rehearsed parts of it in the car on the way over. But here's the thing about being 63. You stop needing the speech to be good in order to believe it. You need the behavior to change. And I had watched the behavior for a year. I said, I believe you mean what you're saying right now. I genuinely do. But meaning something in the moment is not the same as being able to follow through on it. You've been drifting toward a version of life that I can't give you. I don't say that to hurt you. I say it because it's true. And pretending otherwise would just delay this conversation by another year. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, I can't believe you're giving up on us. I said, I'm not giving up. I'm being clear. There's a difference. She left an hour later. She was quiet going out, which was harder somehow than if she'd been angry. I stood on my front step and watched her car go down the road, and then I went inside and sat in the workshop until it was dark. The following weeks had their rough moments. I won't dress that up. 40-odd years of being a functional adult doesn't mean you're immune to the particular sadness of a relationship ending. I'd look at the side of the bed she'd slept on and feel it. I'd go to put on a podcast she'd recommended and remember. That's just how it is. You feel it, and you keep going. I had dinner with my son about 3 weeks later. He's 34, a plumber out in Hornby, a no-nonsense kind of man. He asked me how I was really going. I said I was all right, which was mostly true by then. He said, Dad, for what it's worth, I never once saw her look at you the way she looked at that job. I thought about that for a long time afterwards. About 6 weeks after she'd left, I got a message from a woman I used to know years ago, Pauline, a landscape architect I'd done a project with back in the mid-90s when I was still working in Wellington. She'd relocated to Christchurch a couple of years prior after a long stint in Dunedin. She'd heard through mutual friends that I was on my own again. She said she was sorry to hear it. And would I like to go for a walk sometime? I said yes. We walked along the Takaro-Avon River corridor on a gray Saturday morning and talked for 4 hours. She knew things about plants I'd never thought to learn. She asked me proper questions and listened to the whole answer before responding. By the end of it, my face ached from talking, and I couldn't remember the last time that had happened. That was 4 months ago now. Things are quiet in a way. I'd forgotten quiet could be the kind where you're not bracing for the next thing, just present in the current one. Pauline came over last weekend, and we replanted the back corner of the garden together. She brought her own gloves. She got dirt on her jacket and didn't care. When we'd finished, she stood back and looked at what we'd done and said, That's going to be really beautiful in spring. I thought, yes, it is. Now, I'm not telling this story because I'm bitter. I'm not. Fiona's living up in Auckland full-time now. I heard through a friend of a friend that things with the director didn't go the way she'd hoped. He apparently moved on to someone new within a few months, and she found herself in a city she'd half uprooted her life for, without the anchor she thought she'd find there. I didn't feel satisfaction at that. I just felt a kind of tired recognition. Some lessons come at a cost. What I want to say, and I say this as a man who's had time and some hard experience to think about it, is this. Respect is not a small thing in a relationship. It's actually the whole architecture. You can have attraction. You can have history. You can have affection. But if the person you're with is quietly, slowly becoming ashamed of who you are, none of the other things can hold the weight. The shame will always win eventually. It seeps into the structure, and by the time you see the damage on the surface, it's been going on underground for much longer than you realize. I spent too long being willing to shrink so that someone else could feel larger. That's not love. That's accommodation. And accommodation has its limits. If you're with someone who makes you feel like you need to be different to deserve them, listen to that feeling. Not to the explanation they give you for why the feeling is wrong, to the feeling itself. Bodies know things before brains catch up. And if you're the one who's been looking over the fence at a different life, at least have the honesty to say so. Don't manage someone else's heart like a project you're quietly planning to exit. People deserve to know where they stand. That's basic decency. It doesn't matter how complicated it feels on your end. On the other person's end, it's their life, their years, their trust. I'm 63. I've built things that will still be standing when I'm long gone. I've raised 2 good kids on my own in this city. I know the difference between something built to last and something built to impress. So do most people, if they're honest with themselves. They just sometimes need the circumstances to stop allowing them to look away. The lemon tree is doing very well this year. The garden's going to be beautiful in spring. I'm all right. I've thought a lot about how things play out when people make choices that ignore someone else's dignity. Not in a bitter way, more in the way you think about a structure that failed. Trying to understand exactly where the load became too much for the joint. Fiona made a series of choices over the course of about a year. Small ones at first, the way she started framing my work as something to apologize for in certain company. The way she began measuring our life against a standard we'd never agreed to chase. Then, bigger ones. The retreat. The photos. The silence that came after. The kind that isn't just absence but is itself a kind of answer. Each choice was hers to make. I don't say that with resentment. I say it because it matters, because choices compound. You make one that costs someone else a little trust, and then you make another. And after a while, you've spent something you can't easily earn back. Not because the other person is keeping score, but because trust, once it starts to go, changes the texture of everything around it. What I notice now, looking back, is that I stayed about 6 months longer than I should have. Not because I was weak, but because I kept choosing to believe the generous interpretation of things I was seeing. That's not stupidity. I think it's actually a reasonable instinct. You want to give the people you love the benefit of the doubt. But there's a point where the generous interpretation stops being generosity and starts being a way of avoiding a hard truth you already know. I reached that point when I saw that third photo. I just sat with it rather than flinching away, and I let myself know what I knew. That's the thing I'd want anyone in a similar position to hear. Not that you should be suspicious or defensive or quick to assume the worst, but that knowing something and letting yourself know it are 2 different things. We're very good at managing our own awareness when the truth is inconvenient. I was good at it for nearly a year. Resilience, I think, isn't about being unaffected. I was affected. The weeks after Fiona left had their difficult mornings. I'd be lying if I said otherwise. Resilience is more about being able to feel the weight of something without being buried by it. You feel it. You keep your hands busy. You ring your son for dinner. You say yes when an old acquaintance asks if you'd like to go for a walk. You let life keep moving, even when part of you would rather stand still. And here's what I know about integrity. After 63 years of trying to practice it imperfectly, it's not about being righteous. It's about being consistent when it costs you something. Anyone can be honest when honesty is easy. The question is whether you can be honest with yourself, with the person you're with when it would be more comfortable not to be. Fiona wasn't honest with me, and I think she may not have been fully honest with herself either about what she was doing and why. That's where the real damage starts, usually. Not in the big dramatic moments, but in the quiet, daily choice to look away from something you know is true. Pauline came over last weekend, and we put in a new row of lavender along the back fence. She got dirt under her nails and laughed about it. That's the whole story, really. That's what it looks like when someone's actually there.